Hello and welcome back. My name is Matthew Vaughn and this is Arts of Hermes. So this video I've split into two parts. So this is part one here and then part two will follow in just the next few days. So today we are talking about Penda's Fen, which is technically a TV play. It was an episode for the BBC Play for Today series that staged dramatic works like written for television, but conceived of as plays, which helped them be low budget and sort of easy to produce. But despite that, I think that Penda's Fen really demands to be read as a film. I think that its use of cinematic language and grammar and technique, from montage to the way it employs sound and sound design, and to I think it's how inherently rooted it is in the particular landscape in which it is filmed. I think marks it as cinema, rather than as a play. So I will definitely refer to it that way, even if technically that's not what it is. So let's see, Penda's Fen was written by the playwright David Rudkin, who has a number of other really interesting works for both for the stage and some other works that he wrote for BBC, for television. My experience with Rudkin's other works has definitely enhanced my appreciation and understanding of Penda's Fen. So if you definitely want more depth here, I definitely recommend looking into Rudkin's other works. It was directed by Alan Clark. And it was initially broadcast in March of 1974. It was repeated once, fairly shortly afterwards, and then just repeated, I think, like twice in the 80s and maybe once in the 1990s, if I'm remembering correctly. So very rarely seen. It had acquired kind of a legendary reputation, but yeah, very difficult to see. I know that copies of the screenplay circulate, like photocopied copies of the screenplay were in circulation. And I've heard, for example, Grant Morrison, whose comic book series The Invisibles, we'll definitely talk about in a future episode in this series, had a copy of the screenplay, and was influenced by that work even without having ever actually seen the actual film itself. And then it was finally released on DVD and Blu-ray in 2016, and then so just slightly less than 10 years ago now. And in that time, I think its reputation and the understanding of it has really grown. Besides just how few people had seen it and how difficult it was to see, I think that the density of the symbolism and themes and imagery and everything really requires repeated viewing, and how rarely it was broadcast obviously made it very difficult for that to happen. So I think it's really only been since its release and broader availability that there's been any kind of critical understanding of it. So despite being 50 years old, it's really only been in the last decade that there's been a significant kind of critical literature and discussion on it. And there's now quite a bit. There's several books that have been published on it, a number of I think 2 or 3 academic conferences that have happened devoted to it. And you can find quite a few essays and blog articles and things like that online devoted to it. So it's definitely gaining in its appreciation and the critical literature on it, for sure. All right, so I'm not going to spend too much time summarizing the basic linear progression or story of the film, but I instead want to be able to trace out the developments and connections between symbols and images and themes, and to do that we'll definitely need to jump around throughout the film. So I think having some basic familiarity with the film will be quite helpful, maybe even essential for getting anything out of the rest of this video here. So if you've not seen it previously, I definitely recommend watching it. If you live outside of the UK, it might not be easy to find an official, sort of legal sanctioned copy of it, either on a streaming service or a DVD that you'll be able to play on your own DVD player, with outside of Region 2, I guess. But it is quite available online, including on YouTube. So do what you need to do. It shouldn't be too difficult to find. All right, so our basic story, just to say a few things about it, is a pretty simple, straightforward coming-of-age story. We follow Stephen Franklin in the timeline's not exactly specified, but last few months of his final year of school. The film begins shortly before his 18th birthday, and then we see him turn 18 in the course of the film. So like all coming-of-age stories, we follow Stephen moving from an adolescent understanding of himself and the world around him to something more complex and something more adult. But I think it's not just that woven into this basic coming-of-age story are a host of other dimensions and themes that touch on everything from religion and philosophy and theology to national identity and politics and ecology, but also that Stephen's own journey is not simply a coming of age, but is really a spiritual transformation and awakening and an initiation. I think the film in its final few minutes really concludes with what I think has to be understood as an initiatory experience. So I definitely want to read the film as a kind of magical spiritual awakening and initiation story. So the two most basic aspects of Stephen's identity that are overturned and then undergo a kind of development and even sort of regeneration throughout the course of the film are, first of all, his sexuality. We see him begin as a repressed and rather homophobic young man who, although it's clear to us from early on that he's gay, he has to go through a process of understanding this truth about his own sexuality and then accepting it and accepting and understanding the consequences of that. We also see him learn that he is not only adopted, but that his birth parents were foreigners, and this really undermines his sense of an English identity, and the importance of that for his self-identity is also undermined. And both of these things, both his sexuality and his national and ethnic identity, really intersect with the development of his own worldview and his politics. So just to list it out on the screen here, a few of the sort of basic sort of lines of development or the dimensions around which his development, his coming of age, and ultimately his initiation unfold. So, as we just said, we see him moving from repression to acceptance of his own sexuality and even his own identity as something of an outsider, moving from wanting to be accepted or wanting to fit into a certain kind of social and cultural norm, to being to accepting the fact that he just doesn't fit into the mold that he's been trying to force himself into, and as we'll see, this journey of self-discovery and understanding and acceptance is really explicitly thematized throughout the film. We see a real radical transformation of his politics and his worldview, moving from a very conservative, right-wing, nationalistic, militaristic, and especially a very conservative form of Christianity, to something, we don't get like an explicit articulation of what his new sort of political stance is, but we see him moving towards, what I think we have to call a left-wing perspective, moving from, from obedience to authority and to cultural norms, to a kind of positive understanding of ungovernableness and disobedience. Yeah, we'll definitely talk a lot more about that as we go along. We also see him really moving from, and I think this is something that we see in a number of other coming-of-age stories, moving from a sense of certainty about his own nature and that of the world and his own future and destiny, towards an unknown that is, obviously simultaneously frightening and threatening, but also holds all sorts of unknown, possibilities. And there's a positive acceptance of these sort of possibilities and exploring that unknown dimension of himself and of the world around him. And then this is something we'll definitely talk a lot more about as we go along. But moving from this isn't quite explicitly stated in the film, but it's so, I think, clearly articulated, that moving from a dualistic worldview of seeing things like darkness and light, good and evil, right and wrong, etc., as mere dualistic kind of binary states, to a more dialectical worldview. And that, of course, intersects with his politics, right? Right-wing conservative worldviews are dualistic, where left-wing politics are dialectical. All right, so to frame and structure the rest of our discussion here, and for following out the various lines of connection and development that unfold throughout the film, and we'll spend the rest of this video tracing out, I'm going to use a sort of loosely interpreted and somewhat modified, adapted for my own purposes, version of something known as a semiotic square. So this diagram will add some more features to it and make it more complex over the next few minutes. But just to start out with our basic symbolic or semiotic configuration that really structures and sets up the film, we've got on the screen here the four key terms that are both explicitly mentioned by various characters in the film on several occasions, and that we also see images and sequences that develop and play out the relationships between these terms throughout the film. So on these four terms here, light, darkness, flame, and mud, and these are really grouped together into two pairs. So on the top of the diagram, we have light and darkness, which are a really binary, dualistic pair, so that light and darkness are mutually exclusive, absolutely opposed, and are sort of independent substances, we can say, so that you can have light without darkness or darkness without light. They are opposed, they are at war with each other, and ultimately there has to be a choice. One has to triumph over the other, both in the individual and in the world, and there does have to be that choice, which is very much a moral choice. Light and darkness are very directly connected to the good and evil in a dualistic, moral Christian sense. Now, throughout the film, that very simple binary opposition will be made more complex and specifically more dialectical, so that these two principles will be seen as interdependent and non-exclusive and related to each other in a way that allows for the acceptance of both and the understanding that both are part of reality, and that they're not separate from each other. And in this transformation, the symbols themselves are transformed from light and darkness to flame and mud. So flame can be seen as a development of the concept of light, and then mud, which the mud here is also very particularly connected to the fen, as is in the title, Penda's fen. A fen being a wetland similar to a bog, but more biodiverse and more fertile because it's fed by groundwater and not just by precipitation. So the mud or the fen being a development of darkness, where flame and mud are not simply good and evil, and they are not simply opposed. As we will see, they go together. So we have a development from this exclusive binary to something more complex and less dualistic. All right, so now we can add into the diagram that we have various figures that appear, specifically that appear in visions. So we have four visionary figures that appear throughout the film that all connect to various terms. Let's see, so connecting light and darkness and really representing that this sort of dualistic Christian sense of morality and the exclusive conflict between light and dark. We have these two symbolic characters who we can refer to as the mother and father of England. And we see, we'll talk about who exactly they are in just a moment. And we can see directly in some of their dialogue and ideas associated with them. Lines like, "You must be born in us, then you become pure light." Right. So that idea that you can have simply light that is absolutely purified of any taint of darkness. And then again, showing that the oppositional nature, the line, if we can't have him, darkness must not, that they are seen as exclusively and at war with each other, that of course they're siding with light here in their war, their kind of this Christian moral war against the darkness. Now, and then connecting, so opposite to the mother and father of England in our diagram, at the very bottom here, we have the figure of King Penda, we'll talk about who he is. Obviously, the film Penda's Fen refers to him, and we see him relating flame and mud together, and we see both when eventually Penda appears at the end of the film and in Stephen's final vision, as well as some of the dialogue of characters discussing Penda. We see something quite different here. Stephen's father in the film refers to Penda as a dark old son of light. So we have dark and light, together in the same figure or in the same image. And then the last two lines I've got here are both lines of dialogue spoken by Penda in that final vision. He refers to the deep dark flame, so a dark flame being a kind of paradoxical, almost surrealist sort of image that combines darkness and light into a single image. And then finally, a line that's become quite famous from the film that Penda says, the flame still flickers in the fen. And so again, if we think of fen as directly related to the symbol of mud there, that the flame is present within the mud, is present that the light is present within the darkness, and that they rely on each other and need each other. And then the two other characters that we have here are the angel and the demon, who I think I want to understand as something like mediators between the left and right halves of the diagram. So angels are conventionally understood as related to light, and they are the good spiritual agency in the Christian understanding, where demons are dark and evil and bad, right? But as these figures of the angel and the demon appear in Stephen's visions, and as his own worldview develops, they become something more complex. So we can see in a way that angels are understood initially as connected to the pole of light, but then move to flame, where demons move from darkness to mud. So these symbolic characters help to transition. These symbolic figures help to transition Stephen from the one to the other, so that they themselves will undergo, the angel and the demon will undergo that same sort of transformation from a binary exclusive opposition to figures that are interconnected and non-exclusive and related to each other. All right, so we can start off here taking a brief look at each one of these four symbolic figures. Now, the first one here is actually two people, the father and mother of England, but they always appear together as a pair, so I'm sort of considering them a single figure. They certainly function that way. So the father and mother of England, as we've said, are connected to the absolute binary opposition between light and darkness and good and evil, and are really the representatives or the kind of symbolic incarnation, as it were, of a dualistic Christian conservative morality and theology and worldview. So we see this father and mother of England. We see them 3 times throughout the film, which is, I think, easy to miss. I definitely didn't pick up on it the first time I saw the film, and I've definitely seen people writing about the movie who don't quite realize this, especially when they appear at the end. I think it's easy to sort of not have any idea who we're seeing in their final and most elaborate appearance at the end. But yeah, important to realize that we've already seen them twice before the conclusion. So the first time we see them is the one time we see them not within a vision or a dream. We don't even see them directly. We see a photograph of them in a newspaper, which I think really emphasizes that they are not so much real people, but an image and a symbolic image in the film. And then that's how, when they appear later, they I think need to be read and understood. So we see this, the image from this newspaper in the context of a debate that Stephen is participating in his school around an injunction that the father and mother of England here, this couple, have won against a documentary called Who Was Jesus?, which seems to be framed, we don't get the details of it, but seems to be framed as a look at the historical Jesus, perhaps the development of the Christian religion in a way that is offensive to a traditional Christian worldview. Now, I think it's pretty clear that this couple are based on the real-world couple of Mary Whitehouse and I actually don't remember her husband's name off the top of my head now, who were conservative, even reactionary kind of social activists and campaigners in England, and I think most prominent in the 1970s, but going on from there, who were especially concerned with liberalism and social permissiveness, and especially in the media here. So I think it's pretty clear that the father and mother of England are sort of based on Mary Whitehouse and her husband. So they've won an injunction against this documentary, and Stephen is taking their side and really defending and celebrating them and this action that they've taken. And we hear him say in this little bit of the debate that we listen in on, he says of them, a father and mother of England, who in this modern wilderness of amorality stand up alone to hold our erring national family on its Christian path. And then we see them again at the conclusion of a dream sequence, which we'll come back and unpack some of what's happening in this dream sequence in just a little bit. But we see them at the conclusion of this dream sequence here, where they appear in quite threatening and sinister guise, and provoke fear in Stephen, though we don't get a clear articulation of his understanding or of them or his relationship to them. But we're obviously beginning to transform his understanding of them. When they appear in this sinister and threatening way. And then the most extended presentation of them is right at the conclusion of the film, where they appear in this sequence that Stephen is imagining or having a vision of, and he has an extended dialogue with them where he finally rejects them and what they represent. And we will come back to that in just a bit. And then representing the opposite pole, so not just associated with the mud and flame, but really with the conjunction of these things, or even with the conjunction of darkness and light, or the overcoming of the mutually exclusive, hostile opposition between darkness and light. We have King Penda, who is described in the film as the last pagan king in England. He is a historical figure. Though I don't really know that much about the actual historical reality or how much is known about him, so we're just going to focus on him as a symbolic figure who appears in the film. And now we only see him in the very last few minutes, but we see him very specifically destroying and replacing the father and mother of England, signaling the kind of final transformation in Stephen's journey. And we'll come back to this a few times as we go through the video here. All right, and then those two, the mediating figures of the angel and the demon that we see several times in visions, both in dreams as well as in waking visions that Stephen encounters. All right, and now we can add just a little more to the diagram that within this sort of static arrangement, we also have motion. So as I think is already clear, we see Stephen moving from his affiliation or allegiance or obedience to the mother and father of England and everything that they represent, and that exclusive opposition between light and darkness. We see him progressing to mud and flame, and to an allegiance, and eventually really an initiation at the hands of King Penda. And just a couple examples of Stephen's dialogue. So early on in the film, when he's affiliated with light and darkness, we hear him asserting in a conversation with his father that the world is a battleground between good and evil. But then, by the end of the film, in his dialogue with the mother and father of England in their third and final appearance, we have him asserting that he is nothing pure, that he is woman and man, that he is light with darkness, and then explicitly saying, "I am mud and flame." So again, moving from that dualistic binary opposition to this dialectical understanding of himself and the world, and light and darkness, man and woman, mud and flame, as all interrelated and non-exclusive. All right, and then I want to take a look at, this is the first dream sequence that we see in the film. It takes place about a quarter, maybe a little more than a quarter of the way through the film, where a lot of the symbols and images and concepts that we've just been talking about really first come through. This is also the dream where Stephen first, this dream is the breakthrough into conscious awareness of his own homosexuality. So really obviously important for that reason as well. Now, we will see the angel and the demon, as well as mud and flame and several other images in this dream. But it's, I think, important to note that this is not the first time that Stephen has had a dream like this. We see him relating in a class where they'd evidently been discussing a dream sequence in a play, that Stephen then relates a dream that he himself had, where a demon appeared on the spire of his father's church. His father's a rector in the Anglican Church. A demon appeared on the spire of the church, which Stephen then, through his willpower in the dream, transforms the demon into an angel, and then transforms it back again from an angel into a demon, which prompts the teacher in the class to relate this to what's presented as a Christian heresy in the film of Manichaeism, which, at least here anyways, is understood as the view that the world is a battleground between the forces of darkness and the forces of light, and the understanding of those things as kind of substantial opposites. So obviously very connected to the upper portion of our diagram there, and that opposition between light and darkness. And throughout, the Manichaeism is mentioned a couple times throughout the film, but I think always really representing that exclusive binary opposition between light and darkness. So now, in this dream sequence, we'll see some of these same images and figures appearing again, but beginning to take on a more complex and challenging relationship and presentation here. Now, interestingly, right before the dream sequence starts, before we get the shot of Stephen sleeping in his bed, we have a point of view shot from outside of the house, looking up into Stephen's window, and then a cut to the open window, as if something from outside, the sort of demonic force that's about to be revealed has entered in through his window. Something is coming into is entering into his experience from the outside. And then as the dream begins, we first see the image of an angel above the Malvern Hills, the landscape in which this, in the English Midlands, in which this the film takes place. And we'll come back to the importance of the landscape here and talk about it quite a bit, since that's really a central concern of the film. But we see first the angel appear, where the angel itself appears as a silhouette, but we also have overlaid this sort of bright sort of sunburst here. So even here, subtly seeing a conjunction of darkness and light, that the angel itself appears dark, even sort of though it's united with this bright sunburst. All right, we're not going to go through absolutely every shot in the dream here, but all the main images that occur and in the order that we see them. So after the angel, we then move to a classroom, an empty classroom, where Stephen stands watching a group of boys in what do you call it, a scrum, I guess. I'm an American, I don't know anything about rugby, but playing rugby, all grouped together and thrusting against each other, covered in mud, and the shots here really focus on the young men's buttocks here. So it's a very, as the script itself makes clear, these are both erotic and excremental images, and Stephen stands watching this with a kind of guilty sense of arousal and erotic enjoyment. But obviously the mud here is important. The fact that this is something dirty as well as erotic. And then we move back to the shot of the angel, who we now see more directly, no longer simply as a silhouette or kind of half concealed behind that sunburst, which also gives us an opposition between the sacred and the profane, between this image of the divine messenger, the angel, and then this sequence of dirty, forbidden, homoerotic, repressed desire that's emerging out of Stephen's unconscious there. So yeah, we have this alternation back and forth between the high and the low, the clean and the dirty, the sacred and the profane. The angel's appearance here is very definitely androgynous, and there's an explicit connection between angels and androgyny and the transcendence of the sort of male-female binary or duality across the film. Right from the very beginning, there's a piece of music called "The Dream of Gerontius" that plays a really important role in the film, and we have early on Stephen discussing the character of the angel that appears in the music, and saying that the angel is male, yet he sings in a woman's voice, which makes him unearthly. So we have this explicit association of angels with androgyny and the transcending of that male-female opposition, which will continue to develop throughout the film. This is even more reinforced in the screenplay, where Rudkin notes as a visual reference for the costume design for the angel, the sculpture of Lucifer by Jacob Epstein, which is housed in a museum in Birmingham, not too far from where the play is set. And for this sculpture, Epstein used his model that he used was a male body, and including male genitals, but a woman was the model for the face. So Epstein quite literally combined, the male and female bodies together for this image of Lucifer. And the fact that this is Lucifer too, and not just any angel. This is a fallen angel, an angel who comes down to earth, but appears, not in this sculpture, not as a figure of evil, but more Lucifer in the sense of the light bringer here. I was also interested to know, I was just looking for an image of this this sculpture as I was finishing the slides a couple days ago. Interesting to note that this sculpture has also become something of a kind of queer icon, at least in the area. And there were a bunch of on the museum's Twitter page showing the angel, this sculpture decorated for Pride Month, and people standing around, sort of waving rainbow flags and things like that. So I thought that was interesting to see this sculpture kind of associated now as a positive figure of queerness. And then we alternate back again to the profane realm of repressed and forbidden desires, where now the image of Stephen watching from afar the mud-covered legs and buttocks of the rugby players, we now have Stephen being pelted by mud. So that already erotic association with mud and homoerotic desire is clearly sort of carried over here, and so this is this being pelted by mud is clearly an erotic fantasy, even if one that induces sort of guilt and shame in Stephen's repressed consciousness. This is also, I think, very clearly a reference to a sequence in the great surrealist director Louis Buñuel's film Belle de Jour, where we see in an erotic fantasy of the Catherine Deneuve's character in the film here. She fantasizes about being pelted with mud in an erotic fantasy that she has in the course of the film here. And then following from the images of Stephen being pelted by mud, we move now to the kind of Stephen's point of view shot from in the school bathroom, and we see Stephen's classmate Honeybone nude here in the bathroom. Now, we've seen this bathroom before in the film. Early on, there's a sequence of shots of different Greek and Latin phrases that are inscribed on sort of walls and lecterns around the school, and we hear voiceover dialogue of Stephen in a rather irritating know-it-all kind of tone, explaining to his classmates what these phrases mean. So so we see basically this very similar shot of the bathroom, though in the dream sequence the Greek words are not visible. Earlier on we had seen the words genothi seauton inscribed above the bathroom here, and the voiceover dialogue during this shot we have one of the students saying, "Even over the bog, look," right? So in the toilet, even in the toilet, we have these Greek and Latin phrases, and then Stephen says, "Genothi seauton," that means discover thyself. Now, it's not stated explicitly in the film here, but this phrase, genothi seauton, is also the words that were supposed to be inscribed above the entrance to the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. So we also have a pagan association here as well, which this emergence of a kind of pagan spirituality is another dimension to Stephen's spiritual journey here. And I think that's important as well. And even this kind of conjunction of now, the Apollo, of course, is associated with the sun, and a god of light and brightness and reason. But here, having this phrase associated with a solar deity in the bathroom, I think also is an interesting kind of conjunction of mud and flame here again, and again that some of that pagan theme emerging here. So Stephen says that means discover thyself, and of course this again is another the most explicit appearance of this theme of self-discovery that runs all the way through the film. And then Honeybone says, "Uncover thy arse, more like it," and Stephen reprimands him, saying, "Honeybone, that's dirty." So we already have this association of dirt and the scene and the phrase. Which obviously relates to, Honeybone's appearance nude here in the bathroom in the dream. All right, so back to the dream here. So we see Stephen's hand caressing Honeybone's chest and nipples, and then as Stephen's hand moves down his torso, the camera also pans down, where covering Honeybone's genitals here, we see a flame here. So this is also an appearance of that important symbol of the flame. And also important to realize that both mud and flame are both being associated with sexuality and sexual desire. So we already have some transcendence of that opposition. It's not that, where we have initially that opposition between the angel, the sacred, and the profane, the heavenly and the realm of forbidden desire. We now have mud and flame both connected to sexuality. And then we watch Stephen place his hand into the flame, as if willingly being burnt by, or scorched, by this desire and this revelation of in the emergence of his own repressed desire. And then the flame begins to emit sparks, and we cut to an image of sparks, like kind of fireworks, streaming forth, which to me really recalls the famous sequence in Kenneth Anger's film Fireworks. Fireworks is a real important early work of Kenneth Anger's, important kind of avant-garde experimental film, but also a really classic of queer cinema here. And this very famous shot where a sailor unbuttons his pants to reveal a Roman candle, emerging from his crotch, which is then lit and begins to emit sparks, much as we see in Penda's Fen there. I couldn't help but read that as a reference there to this sort of classic, image from experimental cinema of homoerotic desire. Some other things in the film Fireworks that resonates with this dream sequence, some of the kind of masochistic elements that we see there as well, I think certainly has a kind of resonance with this sequence from Penda's Fen. And then we return once again to the angel, seen again dark in silhouette, though here instead of rising up over the hills, we see the angel over the roof of Stephen's father's church here, as he referenced in the dream that he discussed in the classroom sequence there earlier in the film. This image we also get a callback to this image later in the film, where another of the characters, who doesn't know anything about Stephen's dream, invokes this same sort of image in a dialogue about spiritual forces in combat and the role of the church, and says, some would say the spire of a church acts as an aerial, attracting around it the old elemental forces of light and darkness in combat. So already something of the way along from the simple kind of moral dualism of light and darkness to simply seeing them as elemental forces. All right, and now Stephen at least partially awakens from the dream back into his room to find a demon sitting on his chest. Now, as he first sees the demon, he sees the face of a character we've already seen before superimposed over the demon. This is the face of the young man who delivers milk to the family, who Stephen is quite obviously has a repressed or kind of unconscious attraction towards. And so now we see the face of that object of his desire superimposed over the demon. And then here we get another kind of an objective shot here of the demon sitting on Stephen's chest. And this image of the demon sitting on Stephen's chest is pretty clearly a reference to the famous painting "The Nightmare" by Henry Fuseli, which is an important painting and really influential, definitely important to the surrealists as well. Fuseli his most popular work, and he did a number of versions of it. Here we see another later version that he did, where we always have the woman in experiencing. This is, I think, pretty obviously an image derived from the experience of sleep paralysis, where it's very common to feel a presence and a weight on the chest, or a being, sometimes a threatening or sinister being, sitting on the chest of the sleeper. And I was interested to see, in just looking for some images of this painting, I also encountered a lot of images of a number of later artists who did versions of Fuseli's Nightmare, in which some were much more explicitly eroticized, as the demon is clearly a kind of emissary or messenger revealing Stephen's own repressed desire and all the sort of associations with that were just built up over the course of the film. So here's a later version by another artist here, showing a much more eroticized appearance of the demon sitting on the woman's chest here. All right, so if we just jump back and take a glance at our diagram again, we don't see the two ultimate examples of the sort of Christian dualistic worldview, the Mother and Father of England, or the final image of this sort of pagan and dialectical view, King Penda, but we get most of our other images here, in particular the angel and the demon, and we also see the move into the mud and flame and their interrelationship here. So this dream really setting off Stephen along this journey from that dualistic Christian view to something more complicated and something more pagan that is accepting and even celebratory of desire, even forbidden homosexual desire. All right, so we'll take a look at the other dream sequences and visionary sequences from the film in just a little bit here. But first, we should explore some of the overarching themes and concepts and images that are developed over the entire arc of the film. One of the most important themes that is developed over the course of the film, and not just important themes, but also I think what really anchors all and serves as the kind of central locus that connects together and provides the basis for a lot of the other dimensions and associations that are developed over the film, is the particular landscape in which it is set. So we're in Worcestershire, in the English Midlands here, and particularly in and around the Malvern Hills and the town of Pinven. So I think psychogeography is really the right way of thinking about what the film is doing, that we have not just an exploration of the landscape itself, but also the history of that landscape and what's sort of buried and forgotten within that landscape, its own kind of repressed history, and the way that this landscape and I mean, in a broader sense, all of the land of England, but here in and around the Malvern Hills in particular, the way that this is a site of contestation, that there are various interests and forces that want to literally or metaphorically, construct this landscape in one way or another that serves their own, political or economic or militaristic goals, and so what we really get is a kind of a psychoanalysis of this place and a revelation of what's hidden and repressed there in several different senses, which really runs parallel and in conjunction to the unburying or the revelation of what's repressed in Stephen's own sexuality and his identity, and then also developing on into some of the spiritual and theological aspects of the film too, which also revolve around some of this same idea of unburying and revealing what is hidden and repressed. So the film opens with several shots of the Malvern Hills. This is either the first or second shot in the film here that we're looking at right here, and so we're looking at the hills here in this opening shot. And then in the very final shot of the film, we are now in the hills looking back down into the landscape. So the sort of first and last shots of the film are really like mirrors of each other, one looking at the hills and the other looking from the hills. So obviously really emphasizing the journey and the transformation and the centrality of the hills and their kind of psychoanalysis of their history and what's hidden within them. In the opening sequence and the title sequence of the film, after a couple shots of the hills looking quite lovely and idyllic, we then have it revealed that there are dark, sinister, repressed forces here, and we see superimposed over the hills a chain link fence with barbed wire running along the top. So obviously referring to secrets and divisions and hidden things. Obviously calling up the idea of something sinister here. And then we see rising up in front of the fence a hand that has been burned, a wounded hand, which is a motif that will occur in those. Also have an image of wounded feet as well towards the end of the film, a motif that recurs throughout the film that we will definitely continue to explore. But yeah, so we see from very early on that there's a darkness here and something sinister, and that this landscape itself is wounded or divided in a variety of different senses. Now, many of the most radical ecological as well as political and social perspectives that we get in the course of the film are articulated by a character who, I don't think we ever actually learned his first name, simply referred to as Arn or Mr. Arn, who is a local playwright in the village. We are first introduced to Arn serving on a local sort of village council where we see him answering questions put to him by members of the public. Members of the local village. Now, Stephen, as the play opens, we see him extremely hostile to Arn and to Arn's perspective, and also we learn that Arn writes sometimes plays for television, for broadcast, and we see that Stephen is quite hostile to these as well, saying that many of the characters in Arn's plays are unnatural. That's the word Stephen uses, obviously meaning homosexual, and then speculating that Arn may be unnatural himself. And this, of course, is just very shortly before Stephen has the dream that we just talked about, from which he wakes up and whispers the word unnatural at the moment of that self-revelation that comes through the dream there. So he begins the film quite hostile to Arn and to Arn's perspectives, though we see in his several encounters with Arn over the course of the film him becoming more open to Arn's perspective, and that playing at least some role in his development and the transformation of his worldview and sense of self-understanding. Now, I've read a number of essays about Penda's Fen that interpret the character of Arn as something of a mouthpiece or a stand-in for Rudkin himself, and you can certainly see why a case could be made for that. But I think that might give too much weight to the perspective of this one character in the film. I mean, and I also think he speaks in such a kind of hyperbolic, sort of exaggerated way that I think taking his political and social statements exactly at face value is probably a mistake. I think it probably makes a lot more sense to see him as one important, his perspective as one important perspective within the film, but not like the perspective of the film himself or the perspective of the author, at least in any simple or uncomplicated way. All right, so with all that being said, let's just look at a few of the things that Arn says in the course of this meeting and how that touches on and develops the psychogeography of the Malvern Hills and this region. So there was a question about strikers asked of Arn here. And we're not going to read his whole response here, but just part of what he says, just showing his political perspective and ecological as well, says, "Is it strikers who smash the fabric of our communities for greed? Is it strikers who pillage our earth, ransack it, drain it dry for quick gain, to hand on nothing but dust to the children of tomorrow?" As Arn goes on, he articulates not just support for the strikers, but really a very anti-state and anti-military sort of perspective. And as his talk turns to the local landscape, he continues in voiceover, and we get a sequence of shots of the hills and the local landscape, which begin much as the film began, very pastoral, idyllic images. But then we start to see images that indicate we see radar dishes, as in the still that's on the screen right here now, and other images that indicate some kind of a secret military presence in the region. And Arn says, not going to read the whole thing again, but just a few excerpts here. He says, "Farmland and pasture now in ancient fen. Somewhere there the land is hollow. Somewhere beneath is being constructed something we're not supposed to know, a top secret. What is it hidden beneath this shell of lovely earth? Some hideous angel of technocratic death, an alternative city for government from beneath?" So I don't know the specifics of what was happening in this particular region in the early 1970s, but I do know that there were a whole number of secret underground bases and bunkers that were built around this time throughout the UK that were all designed as shelters for the government and military personnel in case the Cold War turned hot. I think it's interesting to maybe note in the course of his speech here, we get not just these secret underground military projects, which again touch on that theme of what's buried and what's hidden in the earth, but we also have the idea of the landscape itself having been transformed. He says that it's farmland and pasture now, but was an ancient fen, so that this wetland had been filled in and converted from farmland to pasture, which is another dimension, the way that humans have, and especially from this ecological sort of perspective that he articulates here, that humans have transformed this landscape for their own use and their own ends several times over. And then in the very next scene, so immediately following after Stephen's family returns home from the council meeting, we see some of the sinister military presence in the area and some of the consequences that it has. So we get a scene of a group of teenagers driving along this kind of isolated road by night, and we see them following the road. We see the road sign pointing towards the village of Pinvin, which we'll talk about is significant. And then the car stops so that one of the boys in the car can go off to urinate. And then when we see him return, we see him stumbling along and now burned and collapses along the side of the car. And we hear him whisper, "The man in the fire," which this line is never really exactly explained what is meant by this, or what exactly has, we even really never learn what exactly has happened to him that has caused these injuries. We just see him, like the next day in his hospital bed, surrounded by military and like civil authorities, waiting around his bed, waiting for him to regain consciousness. But we never learn exactly what it is that happened, nor do we ever learn exactly what it is that he saw. Now, because of the association of the pinvin, as we'll develop, and the imagery of the fire, I think it's tempting to think that he has had some kind of a vision of King Penda, and that somehow in his wounded and disoriented state, something of the hidden spirit of this land is revealed to him, but it remains ambiguous. All right, and then from there, we cut to a scene of Stephen's father, the rector, talking to Mr. Arn at Mr. Arn's home. And Stephen's father comes by to show Arn the article in the newspaper that we see here, where it says, "Pinvin mishap, man injured by weather balloon." Which, of course, I think we were supposed to assume here that it wasn't really a weather balloon, but it was whatever sort of secret military operation is happening in the area that they are now covering up. And then Arn and Stephen's father then have a dialogue, obviously relating, and it's Arn's speech at the council that obviously prompts Stephen's father to drop by and to talk to him about this issue, since he had just been talking about the military presence in the area. So we hear Arn say, "Again and again, everywhere, you will find these sick laboratories built on or beneath such haunted sites, as though thereby to bottle the primal genie of the earth and to pervert him." And then Stephen's father says, "Now who is the genie in our fen?" And Arn says, "I wouldn't know." "Father, are you interested in the occult, Mr. Arn?" And Arn says, humorously, "Not in the least. I'm a writer. I have demons of my own." So we're now introduced to this idea of a genie or a spirit, a living presence within this landscape, and also this suggestion that secret government sites are often built in these landscapes that have a haunted or a sacred presence. They mention Los Alamos in New Mexico, where a lot of the atomic testing happened. That was sacred to the indigenous people that lived in that area. So now we're getting a kind of implication that this is true in this region as well, that this sacred character of the land and the spirit that dwells there is being somehow perverted or co-opted by this secret military project. And as we will go on to learn, that spirit, that primal genie of the earth within the fen, either is King Penda, or perhaps we could also say it is simply personified as King Penda, or perhaps that Stephen comes to understand that presence and that spiritual power through the image of King Penda. I don't think that those different interpretations aren't that important, but they will be associated with Penda and what he stands for and represents. And then we cut to a scene of Stephen on his way home from school, encountering this road that the teenagers were driving along, that this road is now closed, and he encounters a worker who is painting the road closure sign, and stops to rather petulantly point out to the worker that he has misspelled pinvin as pinfin, so that he's substituted an F for a V. Now, this is actually based on a true occurrence. I believe it was David Rudkin's wife. On her, they lived in this area, and she saw a road closure sign where pinvin was spelled as pinfin, and then after mentioning this to Rudkin, he looked into the history and origin of that village name, which Stephen will also do. So kind of a lot of the seed of of this film was the misspelling of a road sign leading to an investigation of the history and origin of the name of this village. All right, and then jumping a little bit forward in the film to after the dream sequence that we already discussed with the angel and demon and mud and flame, we see Stephen reneging on his military apprenticeship, which to me I sort of felt a bit abrupt that he would just immediately come to that decision upon the revelation of his own sexuality. But I don't know, maybe it makes more sense in the particular context of its time, that would be the kind of immediate implication that he would have, that he's gay and therefore just can no longer go on with the military apprenticeship. And then we see him on his way home, looking quite troubled and pensive, and coming again to the road closure sign, where we see that the pin fin has now been, the spelling has now been corrected to pin vin. And then we see Stephen wandering off into the fen in this area, which begins, I think, one of the most beautiful sequences in the film. So we see Stephen sitting and looking into the water, and contemplating these new revelations about his own nature and presumably what this means for his future. So we see him first just sitting and looking into the waters, and then we get this objective shot of Stephen sitting there, and behind him, the angel from his dream sequence now appears in the fen alongside him. An interesting detail from the production of the film, and I think it was in an interview, Rudkin recounts that when he saw some early cuts or some early work being done on the film, now, as Stephen wanders out, we hear bird song and the sound of water. And then initially they had it so that when we first see the angel, the bird song cuts out of the soundtrack, and we get a kind of silence as the angel appears. But Rudkin insisted that the bird song be put back in, and that there should be no change in the sonic landscape here, that the angel is present in the same space that the birds and the waters and the life of nature here is also. It doesn't contradict in any way that the natural life of this place, which is, I think, not just pointing towards the non-contradiction between the sacred or the divine and the natural, but I think the fact that this is happening in a fen is significant as well. Fens often had kind of in traditional the society had an association with, they were sinister places. They were sort of demon haunted, a place where malign or sinister forces might dwell. And so it's significant that an angel appears here, and that the sounds of the life of the place, continue uninterrupted and are, sort of fully sort of coextensive with this angelic presence here. And then we see, now that we get the subjective shot of Stephen seeing the reflection of the angel in the water, though of course it's quite significant that we get the objective shot first before the subjective shot, indicating that the angel really is there and present. This isn't just something. If we got the subjective shot first, right, the implication would be that this is only happening in Stephen's mind. And then Stephen turns and looks. But the angel is now gone. And then a little further on, following a scene where Stephen has a rather unpleasant encounter with one of the teachers, who not only expresses his displeasure and disapproval with Stephen becoming what in the film they term a non-cooperative, that he's not continuing or participating in this military apprenticeship that he had been engaged in here. and not just expressing his personal disapproval, but also saying that this threatens Stephen's future and his ability to get a good recommendation from the school, which will be necessary for Stephen to go on to university or any kind of prestigious job. So then we see Stephen cycling home, and while cycling, we see the kind of specter or image of the demon sort of appear, but appearing in a kind of superimposition, so quite different than the way that the angel appears. But we see this, the kind of image of the demon sort of rise up and cause Stephen to crash his bike and fall and hit the ground and become unconscious, which initiates the second dream sequence in the film. So we first get, now we're back in this same area near where the road closure sign is. And so we see the worker again at the sign, but here he's peeling away the V in the sign to reveal the F underneath. And then intercut with this, we also see the road sign going from saying Pin Vin to then saying Pin Fin. And then progressing even further to a sign that says Penda Fen. So the implication here is that we are sort of stripping away the layers of, we're sort of moving kind of backwards in time and stripping away the various layers and accretions over the spirit and nature of this place, as if we are descending down to a deeper level. And then we see Stephen wandering out past the road closure sign as if heading back into the same area of the fen, where he had previously encountered the angel. But then he hears a sound from behind him, and he turns to see, now sort of suddenly appearing in this dream landscape, this large sort of stately manor here, which I think it's important that he is diverted from his path into the fen, that this is something that almost comes in the way of what his impulse had been. This is something that imposes itself onto his path and diverts him. And so I think we get also here not just the revelation of the deeper reality of the fen itself and what is buried and forgotten inside the fen, but also a revelation of the forces that are keeping both the spirit, the primal genie of this land repressed, as well as what has the repression that Stephen himself has internalized and is now struggling to overcome and to work through. So we then get Stephen moving through the grounds of this manor here, and finally coming to a scene in a very well manicured, sort of upper class looking garden. We see both adults and children, all nicely dressed and in a lot of kind of yellows and springtime sort of colors, who appear to be coming up sort of one by one or in small groups to present their hand, to rather happily and cheerfully and willingly place their hands upon this kind of tree stump sort of table in the middle of the space, where a man in a tuxedo, who's described in the screenplay as looking rather like Alfred Hitchcock, uses a meat cleaver to cut their hands off. So this, I think, is pretty easily read as a kind of castration symbol, that in the cutting off of the hands is like the repression and severing of desire, that which is forbidden by the forces of social repression that obviously caused Stephen to repress his own sexuality or whatever sort of authentic desire is necessarily repressed and severed, and that we are separated from by the repressive controlling forces of society, which are very obviously here linked to the upper classes and the ruling class. And then from out of the group of people sitting around this scene, we now have the mother and father of England stand up and come towards Stephen, making that same sort of celebratory gesture with their hands there that we had seen in the photograph at the beginning, and now beckoning and inviting Stephen to partake and to submit himself to this kind of castration and repression here. At which point, Stephen wakes up from the dream. And then, prompted by this dream, Stephen looks into the history of the name of the village Pinvin, and through this sequence of peeling back the name to Pinfin and then to Penda Fen, he goes looking for the origin, the history of this name. Now he finds this in what they refer to as the place name book, which he has to sort of search for. And in his search, a couple other things related to the surface level plot take place. He finds something in his father's study that we'll talk about in a little bit, and he has to go and talk to Mr. Arn, who has borrowed this book. But the point here now is that he learns, once he gets a hold of the book, he learns that this word Penda Fen that he saw in his dream is really the origin of the name of Pinvin, dated there to 1187. So quite an old name for this village, obviously, and that Penda Fen means Penda's fen. And then it's not really until somewhat later in the film that drawing on towards the conclusion that Stephen comes to understand the significance of this name and to understand who the Penda is in the name Penda's fen. So he has this long conversation with his father that we'll actually return to a few times. It's a conversation really touches on and draws together a number of the themes and images that are developed throughout the film. But in the context of talking about the sort of pagan origins of Christianity and paganism as a kind of local sort of village scale religion, in opposition to the church and its vast power and its connection to the state and the sort of domineering power of the monolithic organizations. We'll come back to that again. But in that context, Stephen's father begins to think about King Penda. And so he says, I wonder about another man, a king of Midland England this, last of his kind, last pagan king in England, fighting his last battle against the new machine, the battle in which he is to fall, King Penda. So this idea of the new machine, the rise of the Christian order and the dominance of the church and of the state as well, and its domination and exploitation and everything that came with that. And then he goes on and says, "What mystery of this land went down with him forever? What wisdom? When Penda fell, what dark old sun of light went out?" So again, connecting Penda to the dark old sun of light, to both darkness and light together, and that there were mysteries of this land that were known in pagan times, but not literally Penda as the last one to know these mysteries, but Penda sort of standing in for this pre-Christian tradition connected to the land and connected and rooted in the local place here, and then the loss of that with the replacement of the local and the replacement of the village by the sort of vast national church and state and these sort of organizations. All right, so I think that's a good point to break off for part one. We're a little more than halfway through the material that I recorded, but it seems like a good stopping point. Before we close out, I just wanted to follow up on, earlier I mentioned Kenneth Anger and his early film Fireworks, and I just wanted to say, if you're not already familiar, Kenneth Anger is quite an important a cultural figure in his own right, a magical practitioner, really connected to Thelema and the tradition coming out of Aleister Crowley's work, and we will definitely do a video at some point in the future on Kenneth Anger's works, especially some of his later works from the 60s and 70s that are very explicitly magical and esoteric. So look forward to that, and nice little kind of intertextual connection with Penda's fen here. All right, so part 2 will be out in the next couple days, and I'll see you then.